so much has changed about the way we do ministry. So maybe right now you're thinking about doing a rebrand, a rename, or just a fresh look for your ministry. In this episode, we're going to talk about branding and rebranding and how to go about that process. Hello, my friends. Welcome to Word Made Digital Tutorials. I'm your host, Joanna la Fleur, and every week we're bringing you tutorial content about church and ministry communications in the digital age. These are brought to you by Compassion Canada and the Canadian Centre for Christian Charities. On this episode, we're going to be talking about branding or rebranding, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the process of how you might go about that. It's a huge and daunting task for a lot of organizations. It costs a lot of time and money, and if you're thinking about doing it, wondering if now is the time, we hope that this will help you. This is going to be a case study where we're interviewing our friends at the Canadian Centre for Christian Charities, because as I was talking with them as we were preparing for this series of tutorials, we realized, well, they've just gone through a rebrand. They changed their name, they changed their logos, they changed the look and feel of all of the content that they produce to fit who they are now and into the future versus where they've come from. So I sit down with Carolyn Innis, who's from their team, and we talk a little bit about what that process looks like. We hope that this will be a case study for you as you can see step by step the process that they went through, and you can apply it to your own context. So let's dive into this conversation with Carolyn. Carolyn, how did you know it was time to rebrand your organization?
So I joined the 4Cs in 2019, and when I joined, I learned that we hadn't approached any kind of brand review in about 13 years. Now, that's not to say that there hadn't been some small adjustments along the way, but typically brands will take 5 to 10 years to do a bit of a review to see if it makes sense for them to consider a rebrand. We hadn't had that done for quite a long time. So not to say that you have to rebrand in a particular time frame, but for us, it made sense to take that step. And also, we were changing as an organization. Our goals were changing and our members' goals were changing. So we needed our brand to reflect how that change was taking place, how we wanted them to perceive us and how they were perceiving us. So yeah, it was time. And of course, we couldn't have predicted the pandemic of 2020, but it ended up being a really interesting learning experience for us, and I'm glad to share a few insights today from that. Yeah, that's a great question. So we don't have a large team at the 4Cs. When I think of the marketing team, it's basically me, and we have a few freelancers that we work with. So with a small team, and I feel like I have enough self-awareness to know that I don't always have the best ideas and I might have some blinders on when it comes to how I perceive the brand. So bringing a consultant was a really good idea for us into the process, not just because it added some bench strength to our team, but because they could look at our brand from an outside perspective. So I would say for us, it made sense to work with an agency, a branding agency for our process. They really are the experts. We ended up selecting an agency that had done work with associations and nonprofits, but we specifically chose someone who didn't know a lot about us. That was really important so that they could do the research about who we are and what our members were saying about us without any kind of preconceived ideas about what we do or any biases that might come with that.
Totally. I think it's this idea sometimes of having the outside eye that's unbiased or doesn't have a lot of history with you to see fresh what you might be projecting into the world with what you say, what the name of your organization. I mean, you changed the name of the organization. Was it expected that you would change the name of the organization, or did that come up in the rebrand process?
That's a really great question, because when we started the process, we were open to the idea of a total change to our name. So something entirely different from the 4Cs. And our consultant was excellent in being able to point out the value that our members were communicating to us about the 4Cs brand and how we had an issue with the word council in our name. And that was part of the reason for us considering a rebrand. Is that by definition, we're not a council. We don't legislate, or we certainly don't legislate, and we didn't want to be perceived that way. And so council felt very exclusive, and there was a formality to that word. So we knew we wanted to make an adjustment to it. What our consultant enabled us to find and discover from interviewing our members was that we have so much good to preserve in the 4Cs name that when they were doing member consultations and interviews, it kept coming up saying, we always reference them as the 4Cs. So if you're going to change that, that's a big change for us. We might get used to it, but why add more complexity to the brand if people know you? And there's a lot of brand trust in that. So that was a really great learning that we wouldn't have had unless we went to our members to ask them, how do you see us? How do you want us to change and evolve? And just the value that our 4Cs name has within the faith-based community in Canada.
I'm hearing you say that you had some of your team, the outside consultants, and then you did survey or feedback in some way from your membership in order to make the rebrand process work. At what point would you say, though, I guess the fear would be for some getting too many involved feels like too many cooks in the kitchen. So how did you determine whose voices were going to matter? Because even when we talk about branding, we're talking about stylistic taste. Not everyone's going to agree. So how did you determine, or what would you recommend to somebody else going through this process around whose voice matters and is going to carry the decision-making weight?
For us, it was about looking for patterns. So yes, there are lots of opinions around brands. Some people like certain styles, colors, but really it was where were we seeing patterns with our members, and what were they saying about us that was resonating with us about who we wanted to be moving forward and how they saw us. And so we took their patterns and developed our brand pillars and identity from what they were saying. So yes, lots of voices. Too many cooks in the kitchen, like you said, isn't necessarily a great thing. But our brand is it's a collaborative brand. We're with our 3,300 members across Canada in ministry together. So to not hear from them would have been a mistake. So that was a really important part of our process. And we may have even taken longer than most rebranding processes to do that discovery phase, but we felt it was so important to hear from them and help us inform the decisions moving forward.
Yeah, that's great. How long did the process take?
Yeah, our process started August 2019, which is so hard to believe. It was like a different world back then. August 2019, and the first phase of our project was what we called our discovery phase. So that was stage one, and that's just identifying who you are. Research rationalization for your change is really important to determine in that. Brand, looking for, of course, board approvals as well, knowing that a significant name change requires some people to weigh in and give their approval on it as well. So we had a 6-month discovery phase, which is long, but was really important to us and gave us the due diligence to move forward confidently with the next phase, which was our identity phase. That's, logo development, icon development, and approvals. That for us was a 3-month process that was done entirely at the beginning of the pandemic in March. So we finished that between March and May, fleshed out our brand story in that time, and then moved from June to the end of September for our application phase, which was the communications rollout, building websites, new marketing materials, a staff internal rollout, which was really important to us that our staff members knew how to live the brand. So we had these very distinctive stages, and the overall process took us over a year to complete, which I would say was expedited a little bit at the end with the application phase, but we really wanted to meet an October 1st deadline. And so we pushed really hard throughout the summer to make that happen.
And so how do you feel the response has been then? Like, this is a ton of work, a 1-year project. Do you feel that it's done what you hoped it would do? And what has been the feedback, or has it brought new energy to your team even in the midst of the rebrand?
Yeah, for our staff, it's clarified who we are and who we're becoming as an organization. I think for a long time with the 4Cs, we felt that as a council, people perceived us they saw us in suits, and we were very formal and not necessarily very accessible. And so while we were providing important work and doing serious work, we knew internally that we were doing that with a lighthearted tone and with a casual tone. And so we wanted that to be reflective in our new brand. And I think our members really resonate with that, especially right now in the situation that they're all in. knowing that so much has changed. We're kind of in this together and we're accessible to them. We're speaking their language. We feel their pain points. It's been warmly welcomed. The change from council to center, I mean, that in itself is like those two words are totally different. A council legislating, kind of overseeing, very formal, to a center, which is this digital or physical place where people come together to learn and collaborate and be resourced. It's been warmly received. And that's also a really important part of the process as well, is to how are you going to measure your feedback and how are you going to measure how it's being received. So we had a kind of streamlined process where we welcomed feedback from members. We weren't trying to be afraid of what they would say. We really wanted to hear from them, and funneled that into a process to respond effectively, see again if there's any patterns to the feedback that they're giving us, and then make adjustments as needed.
Awesome. I think the last question that I have is around the finances of it. Rebrands costs a lot, and the return on investment might not be super direct. It's not a product that you're selling or a membership that someone's participating in as a paid member. It's something at a sort of a higher level than that. And so if people are kind of in that position right now where they're wondering if they should do a rebrand and if it's worth it, what would you say? What would be some things to help them know if it's something they should spend their money on in tight budgets?
Yeah, and that's obviously a big concern. People want to be like fiscally responsible as ministries and use, especially if they're raising donations, they want to steward those resources really well. But the question is like, what's it going to cost your organization if you don't make the change? If you really do need to rebrand and your current identity isn't reflecting your organization and it's not resonating, then, maybe you can make small changes. You don't have to do something drastic necessarily all at once. There are brands that make incremental changes to their brand over time, and that can be a cost saving as well, just to make sure it's working before you make this big, large, risky change. So I would say evaluate where you are in your process. If you're able to financially do the change and it makes more sense and it's risky not to do the change, then you do need to budget for that and make an investment into your brand. If you're experimenting with your brand, then I think you can make incremental changes for a lot less of the cost. And that might be a good way to learn as well.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. I love what you said too about the idea of sometimes it's too risky not to make the change. That sometimes the cost of staying the same is actually greater than the cost of change. So Carolyn, thanks so much for some insights. If people want to find more, if they want to see some content about your brand transition, why don't we link some things down in the show notes so that people can find it? But do you want to just give us what's the main website or the main social media places that they can be found?
Sure. So you can check out our website at cccc.org, 4cs.org. And that's the best place to find some information. We have a whole page on that site dedicated to our rebrand that can answer more questions if you have them.
Thanks so much to Carolyn and the Canadian Centre for Christian Charities for sharing their case study with us of how they made the decision of going through a rebrand. And then what I love is how she talked about the phases that they went through. Now, it took over a year for them. It doesn't always have to take that long, but you can see that it is an extensive process to make decisions that are for the long term, that you're investing in to do with who you are as an organization and what really matters, what's going to reflect that in how you talk about yourself and present yourself in the world. We're in such a highly visual world, which is why I talk in another tutorial all about how to do tactile things that use all 5 of our senses. But of course, a lot of what we're doing is with our eyes and with our ears. And so we want to make sure what we sound like and what we look like as a brand really matches with who we really want to be as a Christian organization out in the world. Sometimes I love what they said too, that the cost of staying the same is sometimes greater than the cost of change. Rebranding does often have a cost to it, a cost of time, a cost of some finances, but sometimes staying the same, getting stuck in the old way is even more costly. I'm sure you know of that in your personal life, and I'm sure you've maybe experienced that sometimes in the work that you do. So may this be an encouragement to you as a practical example that you can change and have a fresh look for your brand, for your church, for your ministry, that branding does matter in terms of how we engage with people in our community, the ones that we're trying to reach with our message. And really the best news in the world, we want to be the best communicators in the world of this good news. And so because of that, we also want to present it with excellence and really with relatability to our context today in the 2020s. I hope this tutorial has been helpful for you. We do these tutorials every single week, and I went to friends at the Canadian Centre for Christian Charities as well as Compassion Canada, and I said to these ministry partners, you know, the church in Canada and ministries across the country, they need help right now. We're doing all these digital things. The world has changed so much. We need help with all kinds of resources, but not everyone can afford to pay for it. And so they've been able to support these tutorials so that you can get them for free. If it's been helpful to you, would you share it? Would you subscribe? Would you hit that like button so that we know? Comment below, let us know the kind of content you want to get training in. We'd love to bring that to you in the future. And if you have any questions about branding, about rebranding, about what to name something that you are doing, we'd love to support you. We'd love to resource you or even connect you to people in your local community that we would know at Word Made Digital who can help you go through that rebranding process. Thank you so much to our partners, the sponsors that make these tutorials possible. As we've already said, the Canadian Centre for Christian Charities is an amazing organization with members, 3,300 members across the country, and they support what you do best in ministry with the things that they do best to do, legal help and HR and board governance and tax and all these things that you may not have skill sets for on your own team. That's why they're there, and that's why they support their members across the country. Thank you also, of course, to Compassion Canada and the amazing work they do on behalf of children through the local church. If you have still questions about what to get some people for Christmas, go to compassion.ca/gifts. There's all kinds of options of some fun and creative gifts that you can give, like chickens or school supplies or a goat or a well or whatever it is that you would like out of the list that stands out to you. Give to somebody who already has enough of what they need and give on their behalf to a family and to some children around the world. It would make a huge difference in this season. See you next week on the next tutorial.